I'm Sue Carpenter. I am the mom of a JMer who is now an adult. I'm also a special education teacher, primarily at this point a resource specialist, but I've also taught special day class. So I am directly involved in any and all assessment of children into special education for whatever the reason. And then my specific job then is to attempt to remediate learning disabilities or help children learn to accommodate for their disability, be it autism, speech and language, orthopedically impaired autism, the whole spectrum, until we deem they may need a more restrictive placement in a special day class or can exit back to solely to regular education. And then my partner, Michelle Best, also has a JMer.
So I have a JMer who is now 13. He's in 7th grade and was diagnosed shortly in preschool. And then I have 2 other children, and so of my 3 children, we have 3 IEPs and special education needs. And then I spend my time as a kind of a parent representative advocate, not a legal advocate, helping families working through the IEP and 504 process, largely in mental health, autism, obviously JDM, or medical illnesses. So we're just here to try and walk you guys through some of that, some of the sports, some of the broad community involvement and things that are available. Obviously, these things change from state to state, so we can't get too specific.
Okay, starting out, we're going to start with the broadest category, which is not legally binding, which is an IHP.
So IHP is an individual health plan, and I'm going to let her talk a little bit more about that.
It does require a diagnosis from a doctor. It requires a doctor's note, not a doctor's prescription. Okay? A doctor's prescription in a public school setting will get you 0 because we can't fulfill prescriptions. So your doctor writes a note as to what the disability is and what the impacts are on that child's education. The IHP is usually for sunscreen, for medication, for breaks that are needed during the day, shortened recess. They're usually implemented by a school nurse if you have one. In my district, we only have health clerks, so our health clerk implements it. It is not legally binding. So if the kid doesn't get sunscreen that day, nobody's responsible. And there's no recourse that you have with a health plan. A health plan can also be done in conjunction with a 504 plan or an IEP, which are both legally binding documents. Okay, so this is the least restrictive, then you move to what education calls the more restrictive environment. My biggest recommendation, my daughter went totally through special education. She started at 4 years old, getting speech and language services through the school district, and then was in special ed the whole way. And the biggest thing that I can recommend is go in with a smile on your face, ask nicely, and if you don't get what you think you need, then you either go to people up above or you put your request in writing. But go in being sweet and nice, because a little bit of honey gets you a whole lot further than a little bit of vinegar. I know if a parent comes in demanding something right off the bat with me, my defenses go up and go, whoa, wait a minute, what makes you the expert over me? Can we talk about this? And the more aggressive they get, the more the education system goes, whoa, I'm going to back off. Causes animosity and doesn't help your child. So go in with that smile, and if it doesn't work, then we can tell you all sorts of ways to go about it otherwise. Take on?
I just want to add with the IHP, the health plan, please make sure that your physician is very specific about what's useful. Things you can ask for include having the nurse call you, or the clerk or the aide, the clinic aide call you and let you know when there's an illness in the classroom, when there's a big illness in the building. Like if chickenpox are in the building, then you might get a phone call saying there's a case of chickenpox, 8 classrooms over, and you'll go, it's not a big deal. But that's information you need to know in order to make a decision about whether or not you send your child. If some percentage of the class is missing, that can be put into the IHP, and they are usually pretty good about giving you a call if there's a big percentage of kids who are missing. Your teacher may or may not follow through on that sort of thing. And then, I'm blanking, where'd you go from there?
IEPs or 504s.
You want somebody's up. Okay, and, oh, I'm going to agree with her about being really, really nice. Please be nice to people. If you are nice to them, they're going to be more eager to help you out. If you go and you say, how can I make this easiest for you when you're talking to the teacher? My daughter, my son, they're struggling, and this is going to affect the classroom, and I want to help you figure out how to make the class good for my child and for you. And so if you go at this as a team, as opposed to going at it like this, you're going to get a lot further. So if you can show different things that you've done and where you've been organized in order to set things up with systems, then they're more likely to work with you and say, you know what, that system didn't work, let's do it this way. But if you come in and you demand, my son needs, for example, I have a child who now has to drink water every 2 hours and needs to go to the bathroom every 2 hours. Well, that is not pleasant for classroom staff. But after they have enough reason why they want to follow through with that, and I have set up a system, they're jumping all over it saying, let's make sure he goes to the bathroom every 2 hours. So these are the kinds of things where if you are proactive, the school is more likely to come back with you and work with you kind of hand in hand. So then in terms of getting an IEP and a 504, and Sue is much more the expert on this, but 504, you have to prove that you have a disability. And you can prove that by way of having a physician letter. Dermatomyositis counts as a disability. It's listed under Section 504. It's listed as part of the, the Social Security things. It's literally listed there. So your child has a disability. The next thing, though, you have to prove is that disability is impacting, interfering, impairing your child's ability to access the curriculum. And that can be tricky, and I'm going to let Sue talk a little bit more about that.
There's 13 different categories for qualifying a child for special education. The one that JM falls under is OHI, which is other health impaired. They all qualify for an IEP based on that, but they don't if they do not need academic instruction that's at a lower level than the classroom can provide, which means we've done testing to prove that there's a learning disability or there's autism, a speech and language impairment, speech therapy services, motor skills, be it fine motor by the OT, gross motor by the PT or the adapted PE teacher. Unfortunately, most states, and California is this way, is OT and PT services are not standalone services. If a child only needs motor services, they're not going to get an IEP. They're going to be referred outside of school. If your child has any other kind of qualifying feature through assessments, formal assessments that give them a disability, then any service that they need gets tagged onto that. My daughter always had academic services. She had speech and language. She had OT. But our OT services had to be directly related to things that she could not do in school. It didn't matter if I wanted her to do a bunch of knitting at home. If that wasn't a skill she needed at school, the OT was not going to address that in school. That would be something we would do privately. Because I had such a difficult time when my daughter came into the school system getting services, I started out with just, okay, academic and speech and language. Then after she'd been in for a year and I let them see how difficult her motor skills were, they wholeheartedly agreed, let's do the motor assessment. And she got occupational therapy on top of that. School, in my honest opinion and from my personal, it's never enough if they need OT, PT, if they need speech and language. We have always supplemented with outside of school. We still do. She still gets private PT. She gets private speech therapy because it's what she needs, and the school can't provide it all. Most school districts have a speech therapist that's on site maybe 2 days a week. So you can't look for getting everyday services. And for getting speech and language, OT, PT, your child's being taken out of the regular ed program. So you have to stop and think, how much are they missing of the regular ed program and not going to be able to catch up because they've been taken out of the classroom this amount of times? So you want to limit as much as you can, as much as you're able to supplement outside of school, the amount of time that's reduced of them leaving the classroom. Academic services can be provided either on what we call pull-out services, which means your child comes into my classroom where I work with kids from other classrooms, usually at the same grade, on whatever academic skills they need. Push-in services is where I'm able to go into the classroom working with that student and any other students who have got similar needs but aren't defined as special ed within the context of the regular ed classroom. There is more and more of that is the belief in special education because it's least restrictive environment. It keeps them with their peers as much as possible. I totally recommend it wherever it's possible.
So the push-in model actually is really big nationally. It's the whole push toward inclusion and ensuring our kids are in a gen ed classroom. I want to step back a little bit. A 504, basically, if you can succeed in number 1 and number 2, prove that the disability impairs your child's ability to access their education, their curriculum. In other words, if your child is constantly having headaches, that's a problem. If your child is so fatigued that they can't stay awake in class, that's a problem. If the lighting in the room is too bright and is actually causing rash, and that happens for some of our kids, that's a problem. If your child is having trouble going up and down the stairs and they're on the 3rd floor, that's a problem. All of these things can be accommodated, and a 504 is a list of accommodations. And so what you need to do is you say, okay, I'm looking at a 504. What can we put into place during the school day that would make my child's life easier? They can change out light bulbs. Schools aren't real happy about that, but it does happen. If your child is older, a second set of textbooks, although that's kind of changing nowadays. Nowadays, they just look it up online. But at the time, it was big. An elevator pass, the ability to not have it, leave class a little bit early or not be tardy for coming in late. You also want to include in IEP a 504, the fact that your child goes to a lot of doctor's appointments. You can actually put this in both the health plan and into an IEP and a 504. My child's going to miss a lot of school. My child is nauseous after IVIG and we're out for 3 days. My child fatigues easily and is going to sleep late, and we'll get my child here as soon as we can. Those are all things that you want to make sure you get into your 504 as accommodations, just to make sure that you are legally protected against, for example, truancy if your child's missing a bunch of classes, or anybody giving them a hard time about grades because this or that isn't done. Your child might need a modified workload. How exhausted is your child at the end of the school day? Can your child come home and do 3 hours of homework? Or can your child come home and do an hour and a half of homework? You just really need to think through what about school is hard for your child, and you can put all of that into a 504. Now yes? No.
Do you want us to ask questions in the conversation or at the end?
Feel free anytime.
Anytime.
Okay. When you give the example of who's not liking to teach the like, and you said they don't like that, can you speak as to why they don't like that? Is it because I'm trying to, there were certain things that we were talking
Repeat his question.
about that they were not that happy, and so we were trying to figure out, is it funding? Does it come out of your general fund, or what is it that causes the inconvenience to schools?
Well, so okay, so let me repeat that. His question, he was referring back to the light bulb statement that I made, that schools don't necessarily want to change out light bulbs. And what is that? But I think his question went a little bit further about what kinds of things might hold the school back from wanting to help out. And the answer actually largely comes back to funding. Changing out light bulbs is not cheap. Providing a special education teacher is not cheap. And the other thing is if you have a teacher who has a bunch of students that have a 504, that teacher is not getting any assistance in implementing that 504. So this child may need to go down to the clinic every day in order to get sunscreen. And this child has this issue going on, has asthma. And this child needs their work in big print because they can't see the smaller print. And teachers just their world starts to whirl because there's only so much that one person can try to implement. And so this again is where I come back always to the team approach. When you can see that your child's needs start to go beyond the capacity of just the teacher, this is when you start to push for an IEP. What we're asking for is too much. My child's needs are too great. And this is when I need the number 3, which is the difference between a 504 and an IEP in terms of qualification. Number 3 is that you require direct services by special ed staff. So if your child, let's go back to my guy who needs to go to the bathroom every 2 hours, well, the teacher can't deal with that on top of all of her other students. And this doesn't even include the behavioral concerns in a classroom that a teacher is trying to manage. So this is where a special education teacher or assistant can pop in the classroom and say, hey kiddo, let's go. And because that can be too much. So when you start to run into these situations that are too much, that's when you involve a special education teacher. You might need, our kids who are on a lot of medications, especially steroids, we have a lot of behavioral stuff going on. They may need somebody to sit with them to help them focus, because steroids don't help with focus. So they may need somebody to sit in that classroom. They may need to, often there's a table that will have the model that she's talking about, the push-in support. So if you have a class of 20 kids, 4 of them may sit at a table with a push-in special education teacher or assistant who would help your child to stay on focus and make sure that the print is big and that the work is modified. So, do you guys, was I clear on the difference between a 504 and an IEP?
No.
I don't think I went full depth.
The 504 plan is implemented by the regular education teacher. Legally binding, but that's who you go back to when things aren't being followed through on. Then what you need to find out if the teacher still isn't doing the modifications or implementing the things from the 504 plan, you need to find out who it is above them that manages 504 plans. Sometimes there's a 504 plan coordinator. In our school district, it's the school psychologist who manages them all. That 504 plan will go in your child's cumulative folder so the teacher next year has access to it. Don't assume it. Teachers rarely go through the cum files year to year. So when your child starts the next school year with a new teacher and it's not time for a new 504 plan yet, take in a copy or make contact with your teacher saying, my child has a 504 plan. Are you aware of what it says? Would you like to meet? Would you like to talk? Would you like to get to know my child first? But so they know, because as well as getting very overwhelmed, quite often at the beginning of the school year, they have no idea who in their class has a 504 plan. They'll know who has an IEP because a special ed teacher is going to come looking for them right off the bat. But a 504 plan can go under the carpet. Middle school, really important that you get it to each and every teacher, same as high school. They've got to have it. The other thing that we got when we had a 504 plan before we moved on to the IEP was my daughter wasn't able to carry her textbooks. The district got us a wheeling backpack because that's what she needed in order, and they didn't have extra books, so that was their accommodation for the fact that they didn't have extra books for her to go, because they went to 3 teachers even in kindergarten, that she would get her materials there was in the wheeling backpack.
Now, how long is it good for,
A
the 504
504 plan and an IEP are once a year, but it is your legal right to call a meeting either for 504 or IEP whenever you want. The district has 14 days to respond with having a meeting once you have asked for it. If you ask for it and you just verbally say and they don't do it, then I always say back it up in writing, because then you've got your proof this is when I asked for the meeting. But they are from their calendar date year. They don't go by child's birthday or school year. It's whenever the services started.
Okay, so if we got a 504 plan and say we should probably, we have to like renew it every year then?
You have to, yes. Yes, so 504 plans aren't as legally binding into the day. An IEP, you are against federal law if you haven't had that IEP meeting before the due date. In our district, because scheduling meetings gets really dicey, we try and schedule it 2 weeks before the IEPs do.
So like, since ours goes through the psychologist there, will they call?
The psychologist, yeah, if the psychologist is the one in charge of the 504, they are usually the ones to contact you. If they don't, and it's coming up on that date, contact them.
Yeah, I agree. It never hurts to go ahead and contact them and say, we need to do this. One other thing, the IEP, is you renew it every year, but you go through eligibility every 3 years. So you don't need to worry every year about whether or not your child will still be eligible. One other thing on an IEP, one of my favorite things that you hear, your child is doing so great. I think we're just going to back off on this IEP. And your answer is no. You wait until you see how successful your child is. Do not give up an IEP unless you are also confident, truly confident that I think we're done here. That's fine.
And
We're ready to move on. But don't do it because somebody else tells you
There
to.
is no legal exit criteria from special education. It's a mutually agreed upon. Here's why we're ending the services. At the 3-year review, when the child is reassessed every 3 years, the team can say, we don't feel an assessment is necessary. All of the assessments we have are still current. I always say, if you're getting academic services, do that assessment every 3 years. Even though your child may be now performing at grade level, still doesn't mean they don't need those supports to stay at grade level. And it is your right to say, no, we're not going to exit special education. The problem is, if you say, my child is doing well enough, let's give regular education a try, and stop your IEP, you must requalify all over again. You can move from what we call direct service model to a consultation model. If you think everything's going great, then just have that special ed staff check in on your child that next year and keep that IEP in place. The best thing to know is an IEP stays with a child through the age of 22 years. It is the best thing, because my daughter's now in college, that she's got for school, because based on the fact that she's no longer getting current IEPs, because as of the age of 18, and once they exit the public school system, they don't write an IEP. But when they go to college, they get all of the accommodations and modifications that they need based on whatever their IEP or their 504 plan was. And the first thing it gives them is priority registration every semester. A big one when you're trying to get classes. It gives her accommodations to be able to go and take her tests with a proctor if she needs somebody to read the questions to her. Question? It's through the age of 22 if they turn 22 in the middle of the school year. If the school year ends in June and they turn 22 the rest of that year, they will not take them for the next year. So unless she's got summer services, extended year services, then she would qualify to continue through summer school. Summer school in the state of California, because of funding, has been reduced to only special education. I can tell you I would not recommend one of my students to go to what we call extended school year, because that's where all the behavior problems are. That's where all of the real severe needs are, and my child isn't going to get anything that's going to help them through the summer. You also have to prove on the IEP that without summer school, their regression will be more than what is expected of a regular ed peer, saying that they're going to lose a year's worth of growth without having summer school. It varies state to state as far as what services are available for summer school, but it's not a whole lot. There just isn't a lot available.
I'm not sure if this is just in Texas or around, but I think our 504 included what they call Homebound. And so the teacher came to our house twice a week to pretty much catch up with students that were in the class. I don't know if that's everywhere, but in Texas, that we do have that.
Okay, it may depend on the state, but at least, I know I live in Virginia. Homebound is not, you do not need to have a 504 or an IEP or even a health plan to receive homebound services. Homebound services are actually most often given for our children who have mental health crises and are unable to make it back into school. However, many of our children are having medical crises. They can be home from school for 6 months. And they then receive the homebound services. Depending on where you are, will determine how many hours your child is eligible for a week. Usually it's around 5. It can be hard to maintain and to hold, so if you get it, be grateful for it, take advantage of it, but let me tell you, it's not as good as being actually being in the classroom. So in terms of Homebound, we've done Homebound, and we've done a split with Homebound. We've done a partial day of school, and we've done a partial day of Homebound. And that's actually, if your child can swing it, I really think that's kind of your best model. It works really well for our kids who have a lot of fatigue and are hurting and are tired. You figure out when they're best in the day. When my kid was younger, he went to school from, I think, 10:30 or 11 until 1 or 2. And so I dropped him off and I picked him up. And technically, he was eligible for transportation services, but I wasn't really keen on waiting at home and for a taxi or some bus to come pick him up and take him across town. I took him. Today, he rides the school bus in the morning. A special education bus comes and picks him up in front of our house. I go, or I have somebody go and pick him up at between 11:30 and 12, and we start taking him to all of his therapies. So you can do a combination of Homebound. You can also do a reduced day. You really need to think about your kid. What is ideal for my child? I mean, we can throw out different options, but you really need to think, in a perfect world, what would work best for now obviously having a one-on-one tutor is great for everybody, but and realistically, what would work best for my child? And just kind of build it from there and then look around and see what your options are. On the college front, basically when you finish, well, let me go back. So for 22, that's usually for our kids with more severe learning disability, intellectual disability issues. Most of our kids are going to exit out, they're going to graduate from high school, and they're going to go on. There are some of ours that might track into a GED because they missed a couple years of their education and they want to get their diploma because they're ready to go to college or community college and get that process started. Legally, every university who accepts public funding must honor a 504. So if your student is coming out of high school and has either an IEP or a 504, they are eligible for that IEP, not for an IEP, for a 504 when they hit college. That can include extra time, extended time for testing. Like my 13-year-old, he takes 3 class periods to finish a math test. I have no idea how he does that, but that's how he tests. The universities must honor that because they accept federal funding. That is the law. One other thing to note, though, a lot of the universities are going to require neuropsychological testing sometime in their junior or senior year if you're looking for something that has any academic piece to it. Now, clearly, we are looking at medical, so if your accommodations are all straight up medical, you should be able to work with just a letter from your physician. If you're looking for something a little deeper, then, for example, I have children who have autism, and when I send, and I'm already prepping because my oldest one is a sophomore, and when I send him to college, I will need to make sure that he gets a neuropsych test that gets that testing done his junior year of high school. So that's something that you need to keep in mind if you have any other types of learning disabilities or developmental disabilities that have impaired things and would need accommodations from a teacher. Are we ready? I'm going to move on because we were supposed to cover a couple other topics. Is there more on the 504 IEP? I know it's a huge quagmire. Yes.
On the 504 plan, you said that it needs to be renewed every year.
Yes.
Is the school supposed to do that?
Yes,
'Cause-
they are supposed to contact you and say, it's time for your 504 meeting, and give you a date and a time.
Well, I'm still waiting then, because I haven't gotten it this year.
When was it due?
I renewed it in 4th grade, and she's in 5th grade, and it's February?
Then whoever is your 504 plan coordinator, if it's a school psychologist, if there is a specific 504 plan coordinator, contact that person. And at this point, since you're so late, I'd put
Right.
it in writing.
Okay,
Because then you told them, I want a meeting, and they need to have it in 2 weeks.
okay,
Or at least contact you to schedule it.
okay. And if it's not renewed, I mean, is it still in place?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
We just need to go over it.
Yes.
Okay.
In fact, an IEP, while it's done once a year, in fact, I've got one outstanding at school right now. The IEP was due in December. We called the meeting. The mother didn't show up. We documented it. We called another meeting. Mother didn't show up. We're now in February. We still don't have a signature, so we continue to operate on the last IEP. I want to give him more services. I can't, but I can't take away
Okay.
because she hasn't come in and signed it.
Okay.
That's actually something to bring up. There's, from the parent perspective, if you have an IEP and the school wants to start reducing services, you can say no. And then your child's IEP goes into a status that's called stay put. And if you refuse to sign to give lesser services, then you have what's called a stay put IEP. So while it does need to be renewed every year, once you go over that 1 year mark, and if you guys can't agree on a new IEP, you can go into stay put status. And there are people, and that is actually most commonly done if you move. If you move from California to Virginia and you bring an IEP to Virginia from California, Virginia may not like your California IEP. They may think that maybe you don't need all that OT, or you don't need this, or you don't need that. So you look at Virginia and you say, we have this IEP. It is a legal document, and you are required to implement it. So they are legally required to do this, even though it's not their IEP. So if you can't come to an agreement about the IEP, that IEP goes into stay put. All of that said, school districts don't always follow through the way they're supposed to. So if it starts to get really difficult, Sue and I are always open for questions. There's more people that are always open for questions. I often refer some of the parents that I work with in my hometown to an advocate. There are lawyers that manage this kind of stuff. There's also, if you look at many of your school systems, we have a parent resource center. She has a parent resource center. Most counties now, most school systems now have a parent resource center, which has somebody in there that can answer a lot of your questions about these kinds of things and would know more about your specific school district.
Difficulties with the school. I have had that before, and I had contacted the Civil Rights Education Department, or what?
In DC?
No, in Texas.
Okay.
And nobody called me back. I called them like 3 times. You have to leave a voicemail. It's like, how do you get a hold of these people?
So you can work your way up. Each state has a way to climb the ladder, and then there's the Federal Office of Civil Rights. And if what is being violated is a civil right, as in a piece that falls under the 504, then you can contact the Office of Civil Rights, and they will often get involved. An example in my county recently is when you apply for your college board accommodations, and this is actually really good news, but I'll get to that in a second. When you apply for college board accommodations, what was happening in my school district is they were not applying in time for our kids who needed extra time testing, who needed breaks, or any of that when they're taking their SATs, PSATs, AP tests. They had not, so they weren't applying in time. So people were getting turned down, and there was not time to appeal the fact that they'd been turned down. And the College Board is famous for turning everybody down the first time. So what happened is when they continually did not apply in time, or were ignoring emails saying we need to apply for this, or when the school was telling people, oh, you don't really need that, somebody went to OCR, which is the Office of Civil Rights in DC, and complained. And guess what? My county got slapped. Now they're really good about making sure that that students get their accommodations applied for, that the applications go in on time with all of the information. So sometimes if the county won't work with you, if you have tried being nice, if you've done all of those pieces, sometimes you have to go to the side in order to get the attention. Sometimes you have to go above them. Sometimes you have to hire a lawyer. In a perfect world, you don't have to do that, and you really work with these people, but it doesn't always work out that way. I want to go back to the College Board thing real quick. If you have an IEP or a 504 in place now, the College Board will accept that. You no longer have to, as of January 1st, you no longer have to apply separately for and get them approved by the College Board. They are now stating that they will honor what is the accommodation list in an IEP and the accommodations in a 504. So that was kind of a big victory for many of us. Yes. You will still need to do an application for the accommodations. You will still need to do that, but they're automatically approving them now. Supposedly, they are automatically approving them now. Let me restate that.
For us at the college level, because Kristen goes to community college, all we had to do was go into the DSP office, Disabled Student Program office, have an interview with the intake person there, give them a copy of her last IEP, and she's just right then and there, stamped it, done deal. And in fact, at that point, she registered her for her first semester of classes and did it with us. And then once a year, we go in and see her. And what are the needs? What do you still need? What don't you need? And Kristen's been going to JC for 4 years. So, and she's beyond 22. And they're still accommodating everything she needs. The other thing, as far as an IEP, that I totally recommend to parents is, if you're having an initial IEP or even an annual, think about it. A lot of information gets presented. In our district, we're no longer allowed to use acronyms. I can't say your child's going to get RSP services. I have to say Resource Specialist Services. But still, for the parent to understand that is asking a lot. So you sign your IEP as having attended, but you don't have to sign approval. Go make an appointment a week later, a few days later, whenever. Just know that those services can't take place until you've given permission. But if you want to think about it and then take it to your attorney even, that's your legal right. You don't have to sign it right then and there.
I recently had a 504 plan done for my daughter, and I dealt with a high school principal. And she was very accommodating, very fast. But one thing that I liked and I didn't know that I could do was that she said it was kind of like a living, breathing document for me. So if at any time there was something that I forgot or something that came up, that we could add it. And so you didn't have to wait for the renewal, let's say.
It's the same as an
to add
IEP.
it.
You know, if you want other goals, other services at any time, yeah, please do.
I want to mention one thing that's also an option. Some schools are really hesitant. They're going to, we're going to take care of you. You don't really need a 504 or an IEP. We're going to take care of you. In today's day and age, if they have something in Arlington, where I live, it's called an intervention assistance team plan. Where she is, it's called a
Response to Intervention, RTI.
So basically some intervention plans that they're doing. And these plans are kind of precursors to the whole concept of a 504 or an IEP, where they will unofficially, out of the kindness of their hearts, because they're going to meet your child's needs, well, they will give you some services, maybe some services and some accommodations, just to kind of see how it works. Honestly, I think you should just go for it. Get it started. Because if you do that and it works, then you go back and you say, hey, this is working really well. Can we make it legal now? Or if it's not working, then you can go and say, this still isn't working. I think we need more. So I really actually encourage you to take advantage of these, because it actually gives you the opportunity to get your foot in the door and get things started, largely because the school system will now appreciate the fact that you did not insist initially on going for whichever, the 504 or the IEP. The other thing you should know, IEPs take a long time to get. You know, the 10 days that she was talking about, from the day you decide you want to try for the IEP, they have 10 days to schedule that first meeting. They have 30 days then. No, they have 60 days after that. If they decide at the first.
When an assessment plan's signed, then it's 60 days.
So you're 10 days to have a student study meeting. At the student study meeting, you decide whether or not you're going to test the kid. And so everybody votes. You're 15. We're 10.
Well, then it's another 15 beyond once they've voted. They've got another 15 days to send home the
It's
assessment
crazy.
plan. And then it's another 60 days they have to assess.
So we don't have that 15-day window in Virginia, the second 15 days. But as you can see, these things grow. They grow. And then once you finally, if everybody agrees and votes that your child is eligible for that IEP, they have another 30 days to implement an IEP. So I do.
1 day.
Seriously?
Yep.
Wow.
1 day.
So I do recommend get what you can right off the bat, even if it's just a 504, even if it's an intervention team plan of some sort. Get what you can right away and work with them. Because if you can have all your accommodations like what are in a 504 while you're waiting to get the IEP, that will help your child. And that's kind of the net goal here, is to help our children. Yes?
He's coming.
I walked out of my first IEP this past year without signing it because we couldn't come to an agreement on where the best placement for her was. They called me back a week later, we had a new meeting, and all of a sudden they were in total agreement with everything that I wanted, and she ended up in the classroom that I wanted her in for the school year. So don't settle for
Yes.
what.
And what happens is, quite honestly, at that point, the school district's running scared because they're foreseeing attorneys. Well, then they have to do their attorneys. And I can guarantee in this day and age, when you go to an attorney, 90% of the times you're going to win and you're going to get what you want. Unfortunately, it's cost you a bundle of money and it's cost you a whole bunch more time that your child hasn't gotten the services. But school districts run scared from attorneys. I do. I do. I'm not perfect.
Are there any more questions on 504s, on the educational piece? Because we were also tasked to talk about some of the community and sports type stuff. So you guys, if you come up with more educational questions as we go, feel free to throw them in. In terms of sports, and April can actually probably speak to this better than I can, she's got a baseball player on her hands. Sports can be a challenge for our kids, as everybody knows. And we can let the pros tell us which type of sports are best for our kids and what they can handle. But in terms of working with the team dynamic or working with coaches, or, for example, my son has done swimming and taekwondo, so working, in our case, with the masters or whichever, it's really important that you be upfront with your coaches and be upfront with the people who are working with your child, because they need to know and understand that your child may have some limitations. You also, though, want to make sure that they have the best in mind for your child. So you don't want to sell your child short either. So it's kind of an interesting kind of seesaw type thing to try and figure out. So recently, so James has been doing Taekwondo since Kung Fu Panda came out, and he wanted to, he was a cute little Kung Fu Panda. He was 1 year into his JDM. He had the big puffy cheeks. It was adorable. So my Poe, went ahead and did that, and it was great. It was really good for him. It was great exercise. It's often recommended as the next step after physical therapy, and it worked out really well, and he did it for many years. He did great with it. He became a brown belt despite a few flares. But then what happened is he had a massive flare that was not caught for a long time, and so he has some reciprocal muscle damage. And what has happened after that is we have continually had people come to him and say, if you would just try harder, if you were to do more squats at home, if you did more push-ups, if you did this, and they're all well-meaning, but they're working off of conventional wisdom. They do not understand our children. One day they punished a group of kids, not punished, they encouraged a group of kids to do better by saying if you can't kick higher than a chair, then you need to go do 20 squats for every time you don't kick high enough. James had like 80 or 120, some ridiculous number of squats he was supposed to do. Let's just picture one of our JMers trying to do that many squats. So my kid, of course, was beside himself, and he did many of those squats and came home demanding that he had to do more. And he was a mess. So that was when I called the Taekwondo student and said, we need to have a meeting. So I sat down with they have staff meetings. I sat down with all the coaches, all of the masters and the teachers and whatnot. And I said, this is my child. And I took 15 minutes and I explained to them what juvenile dermatomyositis is, who my child is, that my kid is the nicest kid. He will give you the shirt off his back, unless, of course, he's uncomfortable with not having a shirt on. But he would do whatever for you. And I wanted them to understand what a great kid he actually is. He is not lazy. He works hard. It's important to him to do well, and it's important to him that you guys think that he's doing his best. But if he does more than 20 squats, you are damaging his body. it will not make him stronger. It will actually weaken him because you are damaging his muscles. His muscles do not repair themselves correctly. And I had to sit down and explain it piece by piece. The way to strengthen my child is for him to do the 10, he can do the 20 squats, the one set of 20 squats, and that's fine. But don't think that you're going to make him stronger or better by adding on too much. So it's really important to show them that balance of where your kid is great and of where your kid has some weaknesses. That is true actually in all areas. James is also really big into singing, we are discovering. And that often requires standing for extended periods of time. And that can be a problem for him. And so I've had to go talk to music teachers and to choir directors and to just people here and there and explain to them that my son cannot stand on that riser for the next hour and a half. He's glad to get up on the riser for the performance, and he can do a couple of your rehearsals, or a good chunk of your rehearsals on the riser, but at some point he's going to need to sit down. And that's the kind of thing you really just need to explain. I don't know if you have anything to add to all this, so let's go into...
I have twins, a blessing and a curse. The curse when one obviously has JM and the other doesn't, and they've both chosen the same sport. It was horribly inconvenient, but because the sport they chose was swimming, and my non-JM daughter was very competitive and became good fast, and the other one couldn't. Watching her sister excel in the same sport on the same team didn't work. So we took Kristen to another less competitive team elsewhere, where she swam, and then Kim swam with her competitive team. It took the pressure off of her, and the smaller team that we took her to let her do a third of what she could do, a half, whatever it was that she could do. The only thing that we never found in sports, and we did swimming, gymnastics, gymnastics, and soccer, was we always felt for Kristen it would be safer as far as her muscle and her ability because of her muscle to work in an age group down, and she was fine with that. The sports teams wouldn't allow it. It's against 90% of the rules and regulations of any organized sport. So we did the separate swimming where she did a club team versus a year-round team. The girls did horseback riding, and again, my non-JMer excelled and started jumping horses while the other one could barely sit on a horse. We went to two different barns, and the one that could provide the more supportive program to my JMer, and the one who could let the other one go fly off horses at her leisure. It's what worked best for us. Just giving them their own space where they're not competing with their sibling, whether it's the same age or a different age, and having their own sport to call their own within what their sibling is doing. They were doing the same thing, but just on two different teams. Fortunately, the practices, for the most part, coincided, so we could drop one, drop the other. That's our experience with sports. Community. We're not going to go into the mental health community piece of this particularly, but more how our kids fit into the community and the things they do. We looked for, as Michelle's gone to singing with James, we looked to other things. Kristen's fine motor skills weren't great, but we looked at art classes, and she did some art classes through Park and Recreation. And then we found a private art studio that when we talked to them and told them about Kristen and her jam, it gave her all of her art lessons for free. As, hey, this is something that's going to benefit her. Thank you so much for sharing. Thank you so much for making us aware. And by the way, you're not going to have to pay for the classes. It was wonderful. So sometimes that heads up gets you a little perk in the door. It did for us. My girls were both Girl Scouts together. So much they were able to do together despite my daughter with JM. And we didn't necessarily, like in Girl Scouts, we didn't say anything about Kristen's disabilities when we went in. We let the leaders, we let the group get to know them, and then stopped and took them aside and talked to them and said, hey, here's where she's not going to be able to do these activities, or here's where she's not going to be able to give the speech because she's speech and language impaired, but she could still participate in it the best she could. But that heads up and that conversation or that meeting was really important. Question?
I really don't need a microphone.
Oops, wow, it's loud. I put my daughter in Girl Scouts, I believe, last year, I think, when she was 7, and thought it was going to be a great self-esteem for her, like to really help get her out of her shell, kind of take some anxiety off of her, get her out there with some other girls that are going to really build on like girl power and focusing on yourself, because I thought that's kind of what Girl Scouts do. I don't know.
Didn't turn out.
Well, we did all the fundraisers. We made it to everything we possibly could have. And, even when she was sick and things like that, when we just really pushed her to be there for all of the stuff that she had signed up to do. And they had chosen as I guess their perk for selling cookies, and we sold a lot of cookies. They chose to go to a water park. And I had told the leaders, look, in the beginning I was very upfront and honest about it all, because I'm very upfront and honest to everybody, the softball coach. And so now the Girl Scout, I've told them, sun is our enemy. It really is with our child. It is severe sun sensitive. And I told her, they all knew about it. We happened to miss the meeting because our daughter was sick, and the girls had all chosen a water park. And we got backlashed against it because I threw a fit, and I'm like, my daughter sold all these cookies and put in 25 volunteer hours throughout this whole cookie thing, and she's not getting anything out of it. And they told me that there was nothing I could do, and that the girls had chosen, and so be it.
Did you go to the council
I
level?
did. I contacted the local council. I went to state council. And I even went as far as emailing like the actual Girl Scout headquarters, and they told me that there was nothing that I could do, and if I wanted to have, there's some Girl Scouts where you're on your own, like it's just you and your kid, and you can go do the functions of other Girl Scouts, but you're by yourself, you're not in a troop. They told me that I could do that for the remaining time, and if I wanted to do Girl Scouts next year, we could do them on our own. They're Juliets. You could do them on our own if we wanted to, if we were having a problem with that leader. Not we can move you to a new group, not we can accommodate you, not we could. I would have even been fine with maybe letting her do some other type of activity with the money that she had raised. But they told me no, there's nothing that they could do. They could not accommodate
troops
us.
because of a reason
They
similar
could
to
not,
that, but they were
could
very
not
accommodating. then.
absolutely accommodate us at all.
That's sad.
And I was very upset because I thought this is what's going to really help our daughter with her self-esteem. She had a lot of really big issues with the skin, and she was just down on herself. And I thought, here's a group of girls that are really going to be uplifting for her in the community, because that's what you see what Girl Scouts are for. And I could not completely believe that they did this.
You've got Girl Scouts.
Yes, I do. I have 2 of them. And my suggestion for you would be start your own troop. And then you can do whatever you want. That's what I do.
It's true. Just got to go through their training.
That's what I was avoiding. Got enough volunteering going on. That's.
But you can, on your own, look for another troop.
They told us they couldn't move us to another troop because there's nothing in our area that had any openings
Oh, well,
that could accommodate
But-
medical issues.
our council told us the same thing, but I went to the school sites where I knew they were the troops and then talked to the leaders and went around. And then they said, we're full. And I said, then can you put us on a waiting list? They did, and we got in. So, I mean, it was out of our area. It was not, but oh well.
Thank you.
Do you guys have any other questions? Because I'm going to go off the cuff here a little bit. Other things for community to keep in mind are you're going to run into situations like that. And it's going to be hard. And so that's where we kind of really have to work with our kids in ensuring that they have safe places where they can do well. And that was your goal with doing the whole Girl Scouts piece, and it kind of fell apart. So I really encourage finding 1 or 2 other people, finding something that is not dependent upon other kids. We've had some team issues. My kid is the slowest kid. We always wait for my kids to finish there. My youngest one and my middle guy. Everybody's swimming, and then my kids get cheered for. Which is the one time you don't want your kids to be cheered for is on a swim team. Who knew? But what you have to keep in mind is that you are teaching the kids around your kid how to be better people and encourage that. Maybe in this situation, try to develop friendships with the other kids in the group. I don't know, sometimes girls can be catty, boys can be obnoxious. We've all dealt with that. But if you can, see if you can't develop relationships so that those kids would want to look out for Brooklyn in a situation like that. Other things you might want to keep in mind in community, there are some different services that are out there. Every state has Medicaid waivers, and they're done differently in every state. So I'm not going to go into too much detail about it. We happen to have a great one where I live. But I recommend that you Google Medicaid waiver in the name of your state and just see, or even just Medicaid waivers, and it'll give you a list of the ones that are that exist throughout the country. And see if any of those apply to you. They can help with medical expenses. The one that my son qualifies for, and where we are, it's called the Elderly and Developmentally Disability. Oh my goodness, forget it. It's EDCD waiver. I can tell you the acronym. Anyway, what that has given him is we have an attendant who comes to our house or who picks him up from school and sometimes helps me out by taking him to therapy. It's a combination, it's an attendant and respite. So you can drop him off at respite care, and you can also have this person, basically they're a babysitter, but they are paid for by Medicaid, which is fabulous. And in addition, that has allowed us to have Medicaid as a backup to our health plan. Yes.
Is that the program that has the low weighted?
No, the waivers do, well, some do, some don't. Well, so it really depends. There is a program that lasts much longer and is more extensive than the one I just mentioned to you. I've just told you everything that it does really quick because it doesn't do all that much, but it's exactly what I need. However, there is another one in Virginia, and that wait list is 5 to 7 years. So it really, and my son qualifies for it, and I just haven't bothered to put him on the list yet because I can't, what's the rush if I have to wait 5 to 7 years anyway? So, this is something, again, it's state by state. Each Medicaid waiver is state by state. This is not a national thing, so you really have to look it up. The other thing I always recommend to people, it doesn't hurt to find out who to talk to in your local DHS. Go there, find out what programs are available in your community for your child. Go to your parent resource center. What is available for your child in your community? When I first started learning anything about special education, and as my children started to develop different diagnoses, and we have I have stacks of paper of all the different things that people have found with my kids, who, by the way, are awesome. My kids are awesome. Please don't get me wrong here. My kids have huge potential, and they are awesome. That said, they've got a nice stack of diagnoses and whatever else. I highly recommend going to your school systems, parent resource center. If there is an organization where you live, CureJM is huge. It's teaching you. Go learn. Go sit down and learn. Go learn about ADHD. Understood.org will tell you all kinds of stuff about ADHD and things about that. Go learn. Really, just become a sponge and take in everything you can. When my son was in 4th grade, I started going to the different events offered by our Parent Resource Center. And the woman was looking at me like, is there anything that you're not here for? Because I went and I learned. And I learned stuff that wasn't even relevant to me at the time, but was later. It was convenient that I had learned that. But it's really helpful to go learn and then pass it on. Because this stuff is complicated, but it's so important for the success of our children. So there's those Medicaid waivers. Some people apply for SSI and do so successfully. Personally, I don't know how to do that. Again, go talk to DHS. I really recommend you find out who your person is at DHS. You find your Parent Resource Center, you find your local group. Most school systems will have a support group of some sort. Where I am, we have one for autism, for mental health, for ADHD, for dyslexics, for Down syndrome. I mean, we have them for everything where I am. So if you want to spend all of your time at support groups, you can do that. But it's really useful to find what is even slightly relevant to you and go learn from these people. It's incredibly, incredibly helpful. And find out what resources they are taking advantage of that might be applicable to you. Another piece is, as your child ages, you have less and less access to their health information. You've probably already, some of you have teenagers have probably already noticed that you get kicked out of the room at your pediatrician visits, that sometimes they won't provide you with your information when you go to doctors. When they're in school and they turn 18, you no longer get to see their educational anything. So if you have a kid who's a senior and he turns 18 in November, well, you're not seeing anything until that kid graduates. So that kid could not tell you what his grades are, or if he's behind, or if he's getting advisories, and you are not invited to the IEP meeting or to a 504 or anything else because that child is now an adult. One thing to consider looking at, there are different types of powers of attorney, which is a choice that your child has to sign, and it's an agreement that he is agreeing that you have that power of attorney so that you have access to that information. So you can get one for health, you can get one for education, you can get one for financial. I'm sure there are some others. Those are the three that I kind of think about with my kids that I might want to be implementing at some point. And honestly, I haven't gotten around to it and I'm behind, but set the precedent. If you have an older one that doesn't have JM, doesn't have other stuff going on, go ahead and set the precedent. You're going to college, I'm paying for college, I'm helping support you while you go to college. I have access to your educational information. So set the precedent so that your younger one that has more issues isn't arguing with you later on when you do that. Have anything else to say? I think I'm out. I could make up something. You guys have any questions at all?
I've got a handout for everybody that is a whole list of possible accommodations that you can put on a 504 plan, as well as what the eligibility criteria and identification forms look like, at least the federal form. It may vary district to district. I know at our district we have modified this somewhat because we leave more space for accommodations to go on it than the federal form does, but the federal form is here. The federal form is like 6 pages long. We've condensed ours into 2 pages, yet we've given more room for accommodations. So all of those forms are attached here. There is a comparison chart here, 504 versus IDEA, which is 504 and IEP and what the differences are. And then there's the famous acronyms that we tend to use in education. So there's that here too. And for those that are online, send me your address and I'll be happy to mail you one. I've got plenty. And that's it for us. Thank you. You can absolutely. Oh, they'll find me on CureJM. They'll find me on CureJM. I'm also on the Facebook moms group too. They'll hunt me down. Question?
So talking about community, I noticed that there's not a whole lot of. So talking about community, I noticed that there's not a whole lot of chatter on the website. Maybe there is more on the Facebook page. Can you talk a little bit about that? Just like what initiatives you guys are aware of to make sure that we're engaging online and all that? And
I will do that. So this is where I put on my chapter chair hat for DC. And first of all, there's a lot of ongoing community and conversation going on in the Facebook group. So I highly recommend joining the Facebook group. In addition, do you know somebody that lives within half an hour of you? Please try to meet them for coffee or lunch or take the kids to go do putt-putt or I don't know what. Take advantage of the fact that you might know somebody who lives near you. This is incredibly important for your kids. My son, when he was, 9, got to know a great teenage girl who lived, 15 minutes away. And so not exactly an age match, but they got along great. And they, it's not that they keep up, I keep up with mom, but it was really good for him to know somebody else and truly know somebody else who has JM. And for me to have that relationship and we could chat and he knew who I was talking about. We have invited families over. They're a good 30 minutes away to get to our home, but we've invited families over. Come on over, we'll have a game night. I'm big on game nights. We love games at our house. There we go, we have games. Yes, are you?
Or throw out when you go on vacation somewhere, because people like
Yes.
Michelle will come meet you, even if it's just for 5 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
We'll come and meet you and say hello when you've never
Or met. Whoa, you came out of nowhere. Reach out to people when you go places. I don't want to hold it. Because people will come meet you. Michelle took time out of their busy day and they met us for 5 minutes. 5 minutes. We've never met anybody else at this point in time once we were diagnosed. And 5 minutes, she stopped. We were in the park in DC visiting. She stopped for 5 minutes. The kids ran around in this big park. And it was nice to finally meet somebody, and hug somebody and that knew exactly what you're going through. So sometimes when you go on vacation, you never know who you'll run into. So
Yeah, really do that. This big park happened to be the National Mall. So there were Smithsonians and monuments and all kinds of capitals and all kinds of stuff around. Yes, they were having a great time. So, and I tried the same thing with April, and we both had intersecting issues going on.
But we connected when she came to San Jose.
So there you go.
I mean, just post something on,
Let people
if you're on
know.
the Facebook page. Just post, hey, I'm going to be in this area at this time. Is anybody available to get together, or would anybody like to meet up? I mean, April and I met for dinner when she was here for a conference, and it was great.
And really, with people who are near you, if you'll put forth the effort to get to know them, that's how we build our community, that's how we find more families, and that's how, in the long run, we create chapters and we all find kids that are the same age or similar ages and interests to ours. Now we know some boys, which is great, and we know some kids who are closer in age. So it's really important to just keep reaching out, even if it's not a great match the first time, the second, fifth, eighth time, it might be a great match. And sometimes it's worth that. We met a group of people like 2-3 years ago. We all drove to Hershey Park. And we all spent a day at Hershey Park. There are things that you can do. People are willing to drive 2 hours to go to an amusement park. And so just to set something up, it was totally informal, but we hung out with some JM families that day. So yes, I do highly recommend to figure out who lives within. They don't have to live near you. If you're going to an amusement park, they can live 2 hours away. So we had people coming from New York, and I came from Virginia, and we met at Hershey Park, and we all had a great time. So that doesn't even have to be somebody who's really close by when you're doing something like that. So unless there are any other questions, I think we're going to cut.
We've been asked, besides the handouts, to give you an evaluation form. And we were perfect, we know that, so.
You can just fill it
But
out
those are
yourselves.
there, and here are the folders, so please feel free to help yourselves. And if you know somebody else who wants one, I think I have extras.
Thank you.